healthy children. Yet the General Social Survey also did a study that 40% of married women report they are happier with kids compared to the 25% of married women without kids. And married men, well, they report that they are happier with kids 35% and without kids 30%. So it seems that there's a contradictory narrative being told to women today. Are they actually happier with kids or without? So this is the problem that I'd like to present to y'all. There is no truth nowadays. There is an objective and a subjective truth that tends to split society into two different realities. What I mean by this is that my dad actually once said that people's perspective about reality has become their truth. But I want to present the facts to y'all today to actually uncover what is actually going on. For my first biblical integration, I'd like to go back to the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5:43 to 44. It states, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." So going back to the lady in the picture, it's perfectly okay to disagree with her or agree with her. No one ever said that you had to have the same opinion as her. But what we can't do is let her truth become ours when it does not align with our beliefs. So what are the arguments today? Well, there are two sides to every narrative, and I'd like to discuss pro-choice and pro-life. For pro-choice, I don't know if any of y'all have seen Friends in the room, but Rachel Green is about 8 to 9 months pregnant in the show, and her baby daddy, Ross Geller, goes with her to the hospital as she's experiencing pain. Ross Geller says to her, "Oh, the pain can't be that bad. Is it really that bad?" Rachel Green then replies, "No uterus, no opinion," basically telling him to sit down and shut up because it's not his body, therefore he should have no say in the matter. Tim Cardin, a former U.S. Maryland senator, puts it like this on X: "Women should have control over their bodies." Now, a lot of us in the room have taken Mr. Moore's theology and apologetics class, and he talks a lot about diction or word choice and the language people use. He states that language helps people understand what they mean by what they're saying. So I would like to ask y'all, what do you think is the most important word in this quote? Control. Should. Not women do have control over their bodies, but women should have control over their bodies. So that leads me to beg the question, whoever said they didn't have control in the first place? Pro-life movement. Americans United for Life put it like this: "Human life is a gift. It should be, quote, cherished and protected in order to build a culture of flourishing." And Feminist for Life organization also says that abortion is a reflection that we have failed women, and women have settled for less. What they mean by this is that abortion has become more of a convenience than it is a necessity. I'd like to bring in adoption rates. Approximately 2 million families in the U.S. are waiting to adopt. That's about 3.6 families per child. Now I'd like to discuss feminism. A lot of y'all know who Beyonce is. In the most recent presidential campaign, she actually supported Kamala Harris at a Houston, Texas rally, saying that she's there as a mother to sing a new song of American unity. She says that she wants to build a new America built on opportunity and dignity. She also comes out and says that she likes to support Planned Parenthood. And in the background, even though she's there as a mother, there are reproductive health care signs. Now I'd like to break down feminism and what it is. Many people will say that there are 5, 8, even 10 waves of feminism, but most tend to agree that it can be simplified into 4 waves. So starting with the first one, the suffrage movement. This dates back all the way to 1848 and even ranges to 1920. This is the fight for equality. So think of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. They're all fighting for women's voice, women's vote. Now I'd like to discuss the second wave of feminism. This is 1960 to 1980, and the woman depicted in this picture, her name is Gloria Steinem. She's a very prominent figure in the second wave feminists, and she's still a prominent figure today. She gained her following by going undercover in Playboy magazine, writing, "I was a Playboy bunny," discussing the objectification and the sexualization of women. Now I'd like to discuss Roe v. Wade. Norma McCorvey won the fight in Roe v. Wade and what would have been her 3rd child. I'd like to give a little statistic for y'all. From 1973 to 1980, in just 7 years alone, abortion rates doubled because of the passing of Roe v. Wade. From 1973, 744,000 reported abortions. In 1980, 1.5 million. So what's the third wave of feminism? Well, this ranges from 1980 to about 2010, and there are three terms that I'd like to define for y'all that I think are very important for this wave. Intersectionality is the first one. It is a framework that examines how various social identities like race, gender, class, and sexuality intersect to create unique experiences of privilege or oppression. Feminism will say that it challenges the idea that all women have faced sexism in a way. So think of the Me Too movement. Founder Tarana Burke, one woman approached her one day and said, "I was sexually harassed." Tarana Burke, being a victim herself, said, "Me too." This sparked this movement, and it all focuses on intersectionality and voice. This then leads me into bodily autonomy. Think back to Rachel Green of My Body, My Choice. It's an individual's right to make decisions about their own body free from coercion. And the last one being gender deconstruction. We see this a lot today with the pronoun situation of I identify as they, them, she, he, and so on. Gender deconstruction is the process of dismantling traditional notions of gender, and it often challenges the binary. People will ask, well, what is the binary? Well, those are the predetermined gender roles that culture has placed in society. So think of women in the kitchen or man in the workforce. They want to break down this binary with modern feminism. This is about 2010 to now. It pushes equality beyond the binary and even breaks the binary, mocking it at times. I'd like to give my own definition of modern feminism to sort of help y'all understand what it is. It emphasizes individual agency and empowerment while also recognizing the systemic nature of gender oppression. Look, women have gained lots of power, and feminism did begin as a righteous fight. We got the right to vote, we got every opportunity men have, so what's left to fight for? Well, they can't even describe what a woman is today, so they have to go to abortion. I think it'd be wrong of me to not include Planned Parenthood, so this is the main focus I want to focus on right now. It was initially established in 1916 by Margaret Sanger, and we talked a lot about eugenics in this class and how Margaret Sanger religiously practiced it. Sanger believed in eugenics, or making a superior white-only race. She did this by placing Planned Parenthood in prominently black neighborhoods, and Planned Parenthood is now the #1 abortion care provider in the United States. With over 600 clinics in the nation. Now, I want to focus on the year 2023 though. My dad always says money was the question. And when talking about Planned Parenthood, that's exactly what I want to focus on. Planned Parenthood Federation of America performed nearly 393,000 abortions in the year 2023 alone. And their income that year, $2.1 billion, even though they're a nonprofit organization. And nearly $700 million of that were government funds, which means taxpayer money, which means your money. So what were the other $997.5 million? Well, those were private contributions from private entities. Like Gloria Steinem, who I mentioned earlier. She raised and donated nearly $160,000 to Planned Parenthood Southern New England. So you can see the overlap already. I also want to bring up this chart. This is Planned Parenthood's total abortion patients and government revenue. You can see the decline in total number of patients, as Planned Parenthood will also like to do mammograms and everything. But Planned Parenthood, they're more focused on abortion and not other services. As you can also see that abortions incline and the government revenue. So Planned Parenthood, they like to mock this verse and say from Psalm 139 for my second biblical integration, I'd like to include this verse to go back to Planned Parenthood real quick. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We have learned a lot in Mr. Satterfield's class how we are intrinsically and immeasurably valuable. God made us so unique. He placed every single hair on our head, and at conception, we already have our predetermined sex, eye color, hair color, everything. Yet Planned Parenthood wants to simplify that and say, no, you're not that unique, you're just a clump of cells, in order to profit off of that. Because abortion has become a business in the guise of reproductive health care. So I've already discussed about the connection a lot, but I want to go even further. The Stanford Review puts it like this: feminism has made womanhood a product to be sold in place of femininity. They can't even describe what a woman is, because look how that turned out for them with Dylan Mulvaney. Stocks plummeted after Anheuser-Busch did the Dylan Mulvaney incident and plummeted over $395 million. And the Pew Research Center also says that only 29% of women identify as a feminist. That got me thinking, it seems that there's a lot of them today, a lot of modern feminists, like Gloria Steinem, Beyonce, and so on. But my mom once said that it's not that there's many of them, it's just that they're loud, like the woman in the picture. We also learned a lot about idolatry in this class, and I'd like to include this. Modern feminism tends to idolize a woman's voice, so much so that they have made it an ultimate thing. But we've learned that whenever one makes something ultimate, you end up destroying the very thing you fought for in the first place. Look, feminism is not what it used to be, but neither is abortion. They have become an interconnected fight in order to make abortion a business and for people to profit off of that. Because, well, abortion doesn't sound as sexy as feminism, does it? So what's the solution? Seems that there's a lot of problems at hand with abortion rates and feminism not being what it used to be. Well, I'd like to say we have to get to the root and not the fruit. As Ephesians 5:11 through 14 says, take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. Evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for the light makes everything visible. We are called in the Bible as salt and light of the earth. So I think it's time we start being the light and we expose everything. I already presented the facts today. I can't do anything more than expose the truth. But it's our job to take that step further and continue to expose the truth. And I'd also like to ask y'all a question. If y'all know me, I love to ask questions. And I'd like to leave y'all with this. Modern feminism is not what it used to be. So I ask, is it really women advocating for women behind modern feminists? Or is it abortion advocates using the term modern feminism in order to get what they really want? Money, power, and control. Thank you.
Wow.
Great job, Sarah. We've got a lot of guests, so I want to open it up to y'all. If y'all have any questions or comments for Sarah, please offer those.
Fabulous job. Home run for the softball player. So think about, how this year we talked to Akila about beginning with Jane Eyre and gaining her voice, and then Jamie and their resurrection God, and we've read some short stories and such. So I think what you're saying is the beginnings of feminism, like you would see in that Victorian era, those are legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's been twisted into something really ugly and nefarious.
Yeah. So going back to I'm really glad you brought up that point. So going back to the waves of feminism, you can see the distinction between the two. The first two, very necessary. I do think feminism was very necessary to begin with, as it allowed women to become who they are today.
Right.
But the last two, it becomes a complex issue.
It's a shift.
Yeah, it's a very much shift in culture, and I don't think feminism can be defined as true feminism anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, excellent job, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go. First of all, great job. You were worried about time. You're good. I'm interested in the term intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
So let me throw it out there. Can you define a little bit more specifically what intersectionality is, first of all? And then my question is there any legitimate critique behind that? We've talked a lot about this, but inform everybody else. Is there anything that these movements, as like you just said, as you move down the list, it's almost like they get further and further away from anything worth, anything admirable. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there any legitimate critique, especially in terms of intersectionality, that can be brought out of that idea? Understanding that perhaps it's been taken to an extreme. Some of the best, some of the worst movements have started with pretty legitimate good ideas, right? Is there any type of legitimate critique to, especially the intersectionality stuff?
So what do you mean by the critique part?
And that's what I'm at. So tell us what intersectionality is,
Mhm.
and what's the critique going on with the idea of intersectionality.
Okay.
And then like of that, like is there anything legitimate there?
Okay. So I do think intersectionality can be a very like complex definition to define, but according to Google, it's the like various social identities, so like race, class, gender, they all intersect to either create like privilege or oppression. And I think we see that a lot today, but like mainly for feminists, modern feminists at least, they sort of take that like a step too far by like radicalizing it in a little bit, and they challenge the idea that all women have faced sexism in a way, even though that may not be true. So I think that it can be a helpful term, but I don't think it's sort of necessary.
And so I think one of the strongest things about it was in the paper too, but like one of the strongest points that you make is it's not that we're trying to devalue you. It's not like in your presentation you're trying to devalue the women's voice.
Right.
You know, the best things can become idols, like we've said in class, right? So what is it that takes valuing a woman's perspective? So like for me, like the intersectionality thing I think is interesting because I'm basically the least intersectional person in our culture, right? I'm a Protestant, I'm a man, I'm white, like I'm checking no boxes. I get no scholarships, like I'm nothing, right? And so, and I think we said that like when we had our chapter on abortion, it's like I'm the least qualified, according to our culture, I'm the least qualified person to talk on the subject, right? And I kind of get it. It's not my lived experience. So who am I to say anything about it, right? And yet, as much as I would value someone else's perspective that knows a little more personally what all these issues, especially particularly abortion, I would value hearing the perspective of someone that it impacts a lot more personally than me, right? But at some point, that voice becomes idolized to where now that person can't be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like that's that threshold where it's like, is your opinion more valuable because it's more of a personal perspective? Perhaps. Does that keep you from ever being able to say something wrong? I don't think so. So I'm beyond a question at this point. But I think it's such a valuable part of your project that I want to highlight, that it's like, in no way, shape, or form are we devaluing a woman's voice, because obviously, I mean, that's what you've been saying the first couple of movements as we're moving down through history. That's kind of how it all started to begin with, going from no voice to having a voice. But now we're on the other side of this thing where it's like we can't even really define what a woman is anymore, right? Which is kind of a whole other project.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Well, and kind of touching on that, perhaps you can go even further in how the family unit has been completely taken apart. So we have to remember how the baby got to be a baby in the first place. Women don't do it by themselves, and so you've got to have a man in there. So but if you take the man part out and he doesn't have a voice, that is not a family unit anymore. So what's happened, without getting too in the weeds with it, is that recreational sex has become, let's just go feel pleasures, and then we're not going to deal with the consequences, which the consequence is the baby. So you start to kind of take it all apart, and I think that's where the movement got to be. It's all women, and it's all women get to decide everything. Disregard the family, disregard the man, because that's how it should have been in the beginning. But that kind of goes way back how it gets to be recreational, and you can get into the weeds and so much of it. But see, I think the man has a big say in it, and unfortunately, I think we've taken him out of it. Women have.
And that's what I was sort of like getting at with this slide. It's like, it did begin as a just fight, and it was the fight for the voice of women's voice, but it's become radicalized so much so, like you were saying, it's like anyone who disagrees with that woman, well, they're wrong. But the solution is not to be louder than that woman in the picture. It's to find that middle ground and ask that question, okay, well, what do you believe? Like, why do you believe what you believe?
Right.
To get to the root.
And so like, I'll shut up after this. it's fascinating to me, like, this is such a healthy conversation, this is such an important conversation to have, especially for a young woman growing up, about to go to college, you know, about to start life, or the real life anyways, not high school. It's such an important thing to figure out where you stand on these issues. Ladies, like, in general, you should be thinking, because our culture is preaching a message to you, right? And if you're not on board, you're kind of in the way. If you're not for us, you're against us. Like, that's just the temperature of our culture right now. But I'm also interested in the fact that, like, this pendulum swings, it swings both directions, right? And so now we've got a situation where yes and amen to everything that has been said. But there's also an element out there where they cut out of a rejection, and I think adequately so, of all the bad ideas that are represented in current, whatever goes under the title of feminism these days, a rejection of all the bad ideas, sinful ideas, wrong ideas. There's this also tendency to go back even before the first wave of feminism. There's an argument floating around there, whatever it means, like when people are arguing for this stuff, that now we're talking, well, maybe women shouldn't have been voting this whole time, right? That the pendulum, and God forbid that actually, like, right-thinking people ever actually give credit to that type of thinking.
Right.
But just to be aware, like, the pendulum does swing in the opposite direction, where it's like, okay, we've seen how crazy this can get in this direction. I just worry that, I'm just always cautioning, like, well, that doesn't mean we get to go back the other direction
Could you
either.
explain? I didn't know that there's a movement going
So,
on. I'm like
sure.
thinking here.
So,
It's really not red pill.
Yeah.
It's raw red pill.
red
Not
pill,
red.
yeah.
No, I'm not.
There
I
you
know
go.
that.
Okay,
It's raw.
30-second crash course. This is, and just so you know, like, it does justice to Sarah that, like, oh, that's the warning bell. So just to do justice to Sarah, this is all stuff that we've talked about and that she's looked at head on, that, like, just, you can't say everything, right?
No, I know you.
So one of the things that we discussed is on the issue of abortion. It's like, Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Right.
Cool. Now what? A lot of people saw that as a finish line when we probably should have been seeing it as a starting line.
Yeah.
And now it's been thrown to the states, and whose project was it that talked about inconsistency leads to imbalance? To where now states who are already friendly towards abortion are now just over the moon about it. States that were sort of pro-life to begin with there's an abolitionist movement that's seeking to make abortion a punishable crime, charging mothers and doctors with murder if they do so. Well, then you have a situation, like right now there's a lawsuit going on between Texas and New York, where a woman who lives in Texas got an abortion in New York. This is the problem with throwing it back to the states. And so there's, again, like, I'm not trying to open a can of worms here, but it's like everything that we're saying, that our culture, I think our culture is starting to wake up about how far we've gone in this direction. Now there's this element of, okay, well, let's just keep going back to the point where now it's on the other side before the original wave of feminism. That there's an element of, you know, of it, that there's an argument being made. I'm really trying hard not to get the whole can of worms out, but like,
Yeah, sorry.
but the idea, no, like it goes, this is something y'all gotta be thinking about, because it's happening. Yeah, when a woman goes and seeks abortion, what would you do with a parent who hired, this is the argument, what would you do with a parent who hired an assassin to kill their child? That's awful, throw them in prison. Well, is abortion not murder? And it's one of those, it's where the logic takes you again, where the pendulum's swinging this way. It's like, well, whoa, hold on, let's pump the brakes here before we start throwing people in jail. And I've heard the argument being made where it's like, okay, so if all these problems came when women started voting,
I see.
maybe they just shouldn't.
I see.
This is my job this is why it's such a tough thing to have a Bible class on culture, because culture never stops moving.
Exactly.
And amen to everything Sarah just said. But also, this story is not over yet.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? What other questions or comments do we have for Sarah?
Yes, so in order to prevent kind of that pendulum swing, because if you look at like the early waves of feminism, it was all about like, okay, we want the right to vote, we want the rights. And now I guess like looking on paper, you could say like women have all the same opportunities than men do, obviously other than facing just like what's in people's hearts. So how would you say like what modern feminism should look like and what it should look like to be an advocate for women, even though we're not necessarily fighting to have the right to vote?
And
Good question.
can I tack on to that question as well? Like, then is it even a good thing, is it even worth it to call yourself a feminist? Like you mentioned, like the importance of language, right? But basically Jordy's question, therefore should we even, is that a term that's worth using?
So, because it's become so radicalized, I personally would not identify as like a feminist today. But I think in order for me to identify as a feminist, we have to look at the original definition of it, like going back to the first wave. It initially began as a fight for equality, but it's become the fight of equity, and because it's all centered around money. And so it's become like more of a business, and people are more worried about how it's gonna profit them and how it's gonna benefit them. But I think we need to find the balance going back to that original definition, and we need to not pursue the patriarchy, but also not pursue modern feminism. But we need to find that balance of, we need to look at how we can both be equal in a way that is balanced.
What else you have?
Do you have like a set way that we can lower the rates of abortion? Like there might be multiple answers, but I feel like we've gone so extreme on both sides. Do you think there's like a middle ground, especially as Christian women, that we can find to kind of level it out?
Good question. So, like I said at the end, women, when they go to Planned Parenthood, they are not being told like this is the alternative of it, because again, Planned Parenthood's trying to profit off of that. And so if we educate women like first before going to get that abortion and seek out like convenience, then I think we can also prevent that. But also we have to look back at, are women going out and just being promiscuous, and when they do get pregnant, like are they seeking for convenience? Because I think abortion should become a necessity before it becomes just an easy way out. So just really just focusing on educating women for them. Yeah.
I do agree with what you were saying, like money is like a big factor behind like all of it, but I don't think that it is like everything. Like going back to what you were saying about like you probably didn't mean to make like an ultimate claim, because there's obviously like all the sexual abuse and then like
Right.
suppression, like all that has happened. It's not just like a money making kind of thing, but yeah. But going back to like what you were saying about like the gender roles trying to be like swapped, I don't know. I don't want to say I disagree with that, because like you do see that, but I feel like it's more of just having the choice to be able to like go out and like if a woman does want to stay home, then like she can stay home and like tend to her kids and stuff, but like also if she wants to go out and like get a manual labor job, like she can also do that, you know? That's like more like how I would see it, rather than like we're trying to flip it where like men are trying to like stay home and then women are trying to go out and like do all these different things, you know?
Right. Yeah, I was more focused on like the whole Dylan Mulvaney incident,
Yeah.
as like they would say men can be included in being like a part of womanhood, when really like men are men and women are women, and that's the fact. It's like you want to start including women in start including men in being a woman, then that's when things get hairy and everything, and that's when I think I could draw the line for that binary part. Yeah, Cadence.
For with like the definition that you have of like modern feminism, do you think that it would be impossible for, because just with the definition that I feel like you've given for it, it would be hard to be a Christian and be a feminist. In which like I know a lot of women, like people that have gone to school here, that are like a true like Christian through God and for God, but also like fight for the rights and are like would consider themselves a feminist. So do you think that that's something that can go hand in hand, that's mutually exclusive, or like what?
I definitely think it can go hand in hand, and I don't think it's wrong to be a feminist and also be a Christian. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that it does become wrong when you say that the life inside of that woman is just a clump of cells, and you want to like only simplify it as that.
Right.
Because going back to the Bible, like they don't explicitly like say it in the Bible that abortion is wrong, because I mean I think they do a little bit, but they do say that it's murder and that murder is punishable by death. But that, like, I'm digressing there. But I don't know, I do think they can correlate, and I do think it's okay to be both, but I don't think it's okay to radicalize a woman's voice so much so that you marginalize others. Yeah, Ava.
So I know we've had a lot of conversations about this in the past, but, and I know you mentioned briefly that, like in terms of feminism, we have the essential rights that we need for equality. So what would you say to somebody who says that that's not true and there are still things that we need to fight for?
I would ask them what else, because we've gained a lot of opportunities. I mean, what else is there to fight for? Abortion? Well, if you look at that, I've already discussed that. So then they have to resort back to what is a woman. Well, they can't even describe what that is. So I would just ask them, well, what's left to fight for?
Do you
Yes,
have a
sir.
definition? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Jordy.
I was gonna ask, like, did you find a definition for a woman?
Have you ever seen the Matt Walsh blog, like the documentary of What is a Woman?
No.
Okay, I recommend going to watch that. He goes around the country asking, what is a woman? And then at the end, he asks his wife, what is a woman? And she says, it is a person born with certain chromosomes, and it's a biological female. So, yeah. Okay, yes.
I was just gonna ask, because especially with like culture now, like if you go on like Disney Plus or Netflix to like watch something, it'll have a whole section that's like women finding their voice or like women's voices or things like that. And it's like mainly children's movies and stuff where the girl like is whatever. But I was just wondering, is it bad for parents to be teaching their daughters like always say, like, I don't know, because I feel like it's a really big thing right now where moms are like, say like what you think and what you think is what matters, and like everyone who's wrong just like tell them the whole, like that's like a whole thing right now where these little kids are like, I don't know, it's just is it bad, I don't know, let me think, okay, is it bad for parents to be, sorry, I don't know how to phrase this without it
Sort of
sounding
weird.
weird.
Go ahead.
Is it bad for parents to be telling their daughters that like what they say has like all of like the power, like they, because when they watch these movies it's like the female in it, like whatever she says at the end is like what goes, but if it's like these girls who have different, you know what I'm trying to ask, like it's
Yeah, I
really hard
do.
to-
So I don't think it's wrong to say, like, you have a voice, because that's the truth, you do. And I do think it's important to empower them and say that you do have a voice in society, you can make change. But I do think I would draw the line when they say your voice matters so much so that it matters more than another person's, because that's when things get messy. Because when you're trying to marginalize others in order to empower yourself, that's just not right, and that's not right. Yeah, Sophia.
So going back to like the Dylan Mulvaney thing and like you saying like they can't even describe what a woman is.
Yeah.
Would you consider that like all feminists like support transgender women and stuff like that? Because like
No, because I'd hate to make that generalization. Several people will have their different definition of what they mean by feminism, but I just would like to make the distinction between all of them, because when I ask someone, like, are you a feminist, like, after reviewing and, like, looking at all the facts and everything and all the waves, I typically would ask someone, do you identify as a feminist, and which wave would you identify as? Because, like, if they do their background knowledge and everything on, like, well, I identify as a feminist according to culture's, like, term today, then I would sort of get hairy. But, like, going back to, like, the original definition, I would say, okay. Yeah. But I would hate to make that generalization.
Yeah.
Carson?
I'm sorry, never Carla, I promise. Like, this is one of those, like, soft skill things I think is really beneficial for everybody. So if you're asleep, wake up real quick. Like, so many of these big conversations in terms of, like, feminism and anything else going on in culture right now, like, this is just a really good example of stuff across the board. One of the most important questions that you can ask someone whenever you're having a big conversation like this is, what do you mean by that? Whatever you just said, however you just identified yourself, whatever, what do you mean by that? You just called me something, what do you mean by that? Because it amazes me how so many times in our culture, two people can be using the exact same term and be talking about completely different things. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm a feminist. Oh, you're a feminist? Cool, we're feminists. And then down the road, come to find out, y'all actually disagree on quite a bit of stuff. And so like, hey, people moving on to college and going on to get jobs and going on to bigger and better things, learn how to converse with people and ask the really important question of what exactly do you mean by that? It just becomes a really important skill for you to have. Person.
So like when you said that in this, there's not much else to kind of lobby for, do you think it's still like important to fight for like equality in sports, or is that boil down to more just like what's in it?
So are you asking like, do you like the whole Riley Gaines incident? Okay. So yeah.
Like if there's like a transgender person in women's sports.
No, I do not agree. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. And if they want to have a separate league to combine those, then sure, by all means. But a woman's sport is a woman's sport, and I don't think we should be inclusive as to not offend anyone just to satisfy someone's needs.
But
Because a man is not a woman.
But should WNBA players make the same share of the revenue as NBA players?
Can I answer this?
Yes, Dad, please.
No. Absolutely not. Just based off attendance. Period. End of story.
But it's the share of the revenue, not should they make the same amount of money.
We're talking about equality versus equity, right?
I don't think so. I think to say equity would be to say that Caitlin Clark should make as much money as LeBron James.
No.
Nobody's arguing that.
Yeah.
Should
No.
Caitlin Clark make the same share of revenue of her team's ticket sales?
I would say
as
that's
LeBron
up
James?
to the owners of the league. I mean, that's
Who are predominantly
that's a business discussion.
men.
Boom.
But if they don't have as much viewers, that also goes.
But that's the point.
Is that what the thing is?
Viewers don't matter. What percentage of the viewership are they able to pump